When will you do a group ride in Sacramento? Well, if you haven't seen my last video, I'll be hosting a group ride to say farewell since I will be leaving the United States for an indefinite period of time. So come out to William Land Park at 10 a.m. on Saturday, April 6th for a 25-mile casual-paced group ride. In this Fix Gear Q&A, we'll talk about slam stems, whether weight matters on bikes, and what I think about Fuji's fixed gears, plus more coming up. For meticulously designed fixed gear perfection, consider checking out our channel sponsor, Wabi Cycles, linked at the top of the description. What's up, I'm Zach Gallardo. Life is short, but don't make it shorter, so ride your bike every day to be reasonably dangerous and subscribe for more fixed gear videos just like this one. Is slamming your stem actually worth it? How do I know how low I should go? Whether slamming your stem is worth it for you or not depends on what direction you want to take your bike build. If you want to have a bike build that looks really awesome, because slam stems do look pretty sweet, and also gives you the most aggressive riding position that you can get on your bike, then slamming your stem is going to be worth it. But of course, it does come at a cost. If you do go too low, you could have back, neck, or shoulder pain. Slamming your stem gives you a greater saddle to bar drop, meaning more of your weight is going to be on your hands. That means you need to counterbalance that by pedaling harder and riding faster. Otherwise, if you don't, then your wrists, your neck, and your back may start to hurt. Luckily, trying out a slammed stem is not that risky at all. Just take your stem and slam it and see how you like it. If you want to take a more ginger approach, you can try lowering your stem by 1 spacer every 20 miles. Eventually, your stem will reach a tipping point where you feel like this is too much weight on my hands, this is too uncomfortable, and then just back off from there. So if you're thinking about going for a slam stem, just go for it, just don't cut your fork yet. And once you find your ideal position, that's when you should cut your fork. I'm thinking of getting a new wheel set. Would it be worth it to have both sides of the rear hub fixed, so all I have to do is flop the rear wheel when I want to change gear ratios? This is one of those things where it sounds like a great idea on paper, but in practice, it usually isn't that useful. That's because, especially if you're lazy like me when it comes to your bike, flipping your cog on a regular basis is just too much work, and a lot of times it's a lot easier and more enjoyable to suck up just being in a suboptimal gear ratio. I tried a similar setup when I was living in San Francisco and I was reviewing the Wabi Lightning with the crazy dual cog. This is even more convenient than having a cog on both sides of the hub. With the dual cog, you don't even have to flip your rear wheel. And even then, in San Francisco, where there's a lot of hills and there's some areas of flat riding, I still found this setup too inconvenient to justify ever changing the gear ratio. Maybe it's because I'm lazier than the typical rider, but I just found it easier to just be in a suboptimal gear ratio than to always be retensioning my chain if I want a different gear ratio. If changing gears a lot is something you may anticipate doing a lot, at that point it's almost like get a geared bike. Those are just my thoughts though, based off my personal experience. Of course, there's a lot of people out there that have this setup and do it and find it very useful, so go for it. Better components or a better frame, but not so good components. Most of the time, you're going to get a much better bike if you spend more money on components than on your frame set. The way that I view the frame set is that while it is a very important component, it still is one component. And usually you're going to get a bike that's a lot more comfortable, that's probably faster, and that rides a lot more nicely if you spend more on a bunch of components rather than on one single component, the frame set. The way that I build my bikes is I know what components I like, and the frame set is almost just a means to hold everything. Don't get me wrong, frame sets are a very important component and play a huge role in the ride quality and comfort and the overall build of your bike. It's just that I think that the importance of the frame set is less important than the cumulative importance of all of the components. Will there be a Wabi Thunder review? Wabi and I have talked about a Wabi Thunder review, and we've decided that because we're doing this sponsorship thing, it wouldn't be right for us to do a quote-unquote review because I wouldn't be unbiased. So as for the Wabi Thunder, we thought that it would be best to showcase a Wabi Thunder and not necessarily do an unbiased review of one because we can't. Side note about the Wabi Thunder, I was talking to Curtis about it. It's actually closer to a Wabi Classic than to a straight cross bike, which I think is actually really awesome. It's pretty much like a Wabi Classic that was designed to handle the apocalypse with fat tires, mounts for racks, full fenders, the whole nine. While we can't do a review per se of the bike, I do look forward to doing a showcase on the Wabi Thunder because As far as I know, there's not really anything quite like it. Out of all the sub $300 entry fixed gear brands, which bike from those brands do you believe is the best buy? I know this isn't the answer that you're looking for, but unfortunately, most fixed gears under $300 are almost identical. None of them really stand out from the others. Fixed gears don't really differentiate until about $400 to $500, and the more you go up in price, the more each fixed gear will differentiate from each other. With that said, some sub $300 fixed gears are better than others. If you can get a chromoly frame set instead of a high tensile frame set, that's probably the best you're going to do at that price. Lightest bike you've ever ridden. The lightest bike I've ever ridden was the Wabi Lightning. If I recall correctly, it weighed about 17 pounds for the 58 centimeter version. Definitely carbon bikes beat it by a long shot, but it's impressive for a steel bike. How important is overall weight of a setup? How heavy is too heavy for a bike? There's no hard and fast rule for how heavy is too heavy because, quote unquote, too much weight is determined by a whole lot of factors. There's terrain, then there's gearing, then there's components, material, there's how many brakes you're running, what your pedal setup is, what your frame set size is, tire width, rider's strength, the list goes on forever. As a rule of thumb, 20 to 22-ish pounds, 22 is pushing it a little bit, but it's fine, for a starter beginner fixed gear bike is kind of like that range. Sub 20 is good, and in my experience, I could definitely feel a difference between a sub 20 pound bike and one that's say 22 pounds. If you're riding a fixed gear bike and it's 25 pounds, there's like, yeah, you could probably cut some weight. An important thing to note is the other end of the spectrum, how light is too light for a bike. And it may be sacrilege for me as a cyclist to say this, but I actually think that there is such a thing as a bike that is too light. Speaking of that 17-pound Wabi Lightning, I actually found it too light for my tastes in that size. While riding that bike, I wanted it to be more substantial, stiffer, more predictable in handling. I found that because it was too light, even in very hilly San Francisco where weight shavings are supposed to lead to a lot of benefit, I found that the bike handled too squirrely and unpredictably while climbing and descending, at least for the 58 centimeter version. I'm not too concerned with weight though. A good bike weighs as much as it should. If you got a front basket, if you got racks, if you got wide tires and fenders, like that's going to make it weigh more, and it's up to you to decide how much is too much weight for your bike. It doesn't really make sense for me to be concerned with trying to shave grams off of your bike, because you need to think about you and your bike as an entire system. Sure, you can shave 300 grams by getting a lighter seat post. I just made that number up. I don't even know how much 300 grams is. Why shave a few grams when you can train harder and lose 10 pounds of fat from your body? That makes a lot more sense to me as far as getting the best performance goes. Unless you're racing at a really high level, you don't need to shave grams off of your bike, and your time will be much better spent training better. And if you're just an everyday rider, too heavy is what you think is too heavy. It's your bike. Don't let anybody else tell you otherwise. Do loose ball bearings have any pros over sealed bearings? If yes, would they outweigh the pros of sealed bearings? When packed with grease correctly, loose ball bearing hubs supposedly have less friction in the bearings than sealed bearing hubs. Unless you're racing at a really high level where every millisecond counts, you're never going to notice the friction of your hubs between hubs of comparable quality. Even then, that benefit of loose ball bearing hubs is up for debate. Off the top of my head, out of all of the modern track hubs that I can think of, there's only one that's still loose ball bearing, which are the Dura-Ace track hubs. And that's not even because loose ball bearings are better than seal bearings. That's because Dura-Ace hubs are made specifically for super traditional Kirin racing in Japan, where components are heavily regulated. Other than Dura-Ace hubs, every single other modern quality track hub that I can think of at least uses sealed bearings because they're just better, period. Opinions on the Fuji Track as beginner fixed gear. Also, is the 2019 Fuji Track a good European option? As a whole, Fuji's fixed gears are a bit overpriced for what they are if you get the most current year model. Fortunately, Fuji always updates their bikes, which means they always have new colors every year, which means that the colors from the previous year go on clearance every year. It's possible to find older models at local bike shops at a pretty good discount. My general advice, if you're outside the United States, you can't get a Kilo TT Pro and you're looking for a steel $400 to $500 to even $600 fixed gear, is to look for a Fuji Feather on clearance at a local bike shop. Fuji make 3 fixed gears. There's the Fuji Feather, the Fuji Track, then the Fuji Declaration, and I would recommend that you look for those in that order. That said, the Fuji Declaration is a distant third. I wouldn't get that at all unless you can find it under $200 US. The Fuji Feather versus the Fuji Track. For 2019, the Fuji Track is made out of Reynolds 520 steel, but that's pretty much just a more expensive version of 4130 chromoly. It doesn't really have any benefits over the previous models or the Fuji Feather, so they're all going to ride pretty similarly when it comes to the frame set. The Fuji Feather has a lugged fork, while the Fuji Track has a subjectively ugly unicrown fork. Also, the Feather comes with seal bearing hubs, whereas the Fuji Track comes with loose ball bearing hubs, and as we've discussed, seal bearing hubs are just better. Because of these reasons, the additional cost of the Fuji Feather over the Fuji Track is justified. But if you can only get a Fuji Track for whatever reason, it's still a really good beginner option. Speaking of really great beginner option, our channel sponsor Wabi Cycles has bikes that are really great whether you're a beginner or a seasoned cyclist. Wabis are the embodiment of fixed gear simplicity. Every design choice and every component is thoughtfully chosen to give the purest ride quality for the money, and they execute those choices perfectly with master craftsmen in Taiwan, whom I'd argue are among the best in the world, and a well-oiled, helpful, and friendly bike shop in Tulsa, Oklahoma. This amounts to the most pleasant experience that I've had communicating with a bike shop, and the most fun that I've had on a bike. Out of all the bikes that I've reviewed, out of all the bikes that I've even built myself, Wabis straight out of the box have been the most fun. Wabi's relentless attention to detail results in Wallace, my 58 centimeter Wabi Special, weighing in at 17.5 pounds or 7.97 kilograms straight out of the box. That's a full steel bike that is lighter than a lot of comparable bikes with aluminum frames and carbon forks. If you're looking for your bike that puts an end to your search for the perfect bike, consider checking out our channel sponsor Wabi Cycles, linked at the top of the description, because it really is the closest thing to the perfect bike that I've ever ridden. Life is short, but don't make it shorter, so ride your bike every day to be reasonably dangerous. And with that, I hope to see you on the group ride. Check it out.